Hello, I'm Darren Jordan. This is Counting the Cost on Al Jazeera, your weekly look at the world of business and economics. This week, Italy, the first nation in lockdown in Europe after a spike in deaths from the coronavirus. It may be the world's 8th biggest economy, but growth has been anemic over the last 20 years. So, will it need a Eurozone bailout? Car plants employing 14 million people across Europe are shutting down. We talk to BMW about the future of the industry. And after spending nearly all their cash on stock buybacks to make shareholders richer, airlines are begging for bailouts. Well, the world's 8th biggest economy and its 60 million citizens are under lockdown. Italy became the first European nation to introduce drastic measures to control the spread of the coronavirus. Outside of China, Italy has recorded the most deaths from the virus. Schools have been closed, shops have been shuttered, businesses are winding down non-essential work, and transport hubs have ground to a halt. Well, the Italian government has pledged $28 billion to ease the burden of the pandemic. That includes helping companies, homeowners with their mortgage payments, and people losing their jobs. Well, Italy really needs all the support it can get right now. It's never really recovered from Europe's debt crisis. Its debt stands close to 135% of GDP. And growth since the introduction of the euro, almost 20 years ago, has barely grown. Well, such is the dire state of its economy, recession is looming, and there have been warnings that it may need to seek a bailout from the Eurozone and even the IMF. So let's pull this all together with Lorenzo Cordogno, Chief Economist at LC Macro Advisors. He joins us via Skype from Chislehurst in the UK. Lorenzo, as we've mentioned, the Italian economy has barely grown over the past 20 years or so. What sort of impact do you think coronavirus will now have on the Italian economy?
I think we are talking about something like a 5% contraction in the current year. It could be even more. So it's pretty sizable and probably will be very concentrated in the months in which there were restrictions on mobility. So March, April, and possibly even May. This is on the assumption that by June, most of the economic impact is over.
And Lorenzo, many experts say the economy hadn't really recovered from the financial crisis. Is that your assessment?
Indeed. I mean, Italy suffered tremendously from the 2011 sovereign debt crisis. And since then, credit has not really grown that much. The economy has continued to struggle to post decent growth. And so it comes this kind of shock when the economy is still somewhat fragile.
Lorenzo, Italy's huge debt has been a long-standing concern, hasn't it? I mean, there have been suggestions from economists it may need to seek help, possibly some badly needed cash from the Eurozone bailout fund, and maybe even the IMF.
You know, what Italy needs right now is to have the possibility to use the fiscal leverage and fight the downturn in demand and spend related to the spreading of the virus without bothering too much about the financing side. So the only way to achieve that is through some sort of safety net, if you want. So the ECB and possibly even the ESM in the future, making sure that the cost of borrowing doesn't blow up. If the cost of borrowing doesn't blow up, the Italian debt might be considered as sustainable because Italy has a primary surplus. Last year was 1.7% of GDP. The problem is that if the cost of borrowing increases sharply, then Italy would enter into a problem.
It's an interesting point, Lorenzo, you make about the ECB, because do you think the European Central Bank has done enough for Italy and for Europe as a whole?
Well, I think the ECB was a bit late in responding to the crisis, but last Thursday came up with a broad-based and comprehensive package. The only problem with that package was first that President Lagarde messed it up with a communication mistake referring to the spreads, but that was just a communication mistake. And secondly, that the asset purchase program was limited both in terms of the amount and in terms of time. The ECB decided to fix this problem. In other words, now There is a massive package. It's a big bazooka, if you want. The ECB also eases the eligible requirements for the bonds and provides more flexibility also in the use of collateral. So I think this is the big bazooka, and I think this will certainly stabilize financial markets. Of course, it cannot do much for the economy, so I think the economy will be stabilized in a sense that there won't be a financial crisis, and this is good news in itself. But also on the government side, there needs to be prompt action to support demand in the near term and make sure that there is no damage on the supply side. And this can only be done maybe with a credit line from the ESM.
All right, Lorenzo Codogno, thank you very much indeed for talking to Counting the Cost.
Thank you.
Now, a company with huge reach, BMW, with a presence in China, the epicenter of the pandemic, has ceased production and warned it won't hit profit targets this year. Al Jazeera's economics editor, Abid Ali, caught up with BMW board member Pieter Notte. He began by asking about those plant closures.
Because of Corona, we will run down all of our factories in Europe. And that is also to follow demand, because we see, of course, across the globe, but now also particularly in Europe, many countries closing down. In fact, dealerships in Italy, France, and also other European countries are closing down. And that's why we also adjust our production. We did also guide on sales and earnings, saying that we expect sales due to Corona actually to be significantly below 2019. And also that on earnings, on EBIT in the automotive segment, we expect a significant adjustment there as well. So nevertheless, and it's important to say that there is a time during Corona, like we are in today, but there will also be a time after Corona. So we also expressed confidence about our ability to drive the transformation in the automotive industry. We are investing significantly. Also with Corona, we plan to invest significantly in future technologies. We believe the future lies in excellent technologies. We will drive the mobility of tomorrow, and we plan to invest up to 30 billion euros until 2025.
Peter, I want to come on to the electrification in a few moments, but tell me, how long do you see the factories being closed for?
Well, so far we actually announced to close the factories in Europe until mid-April, around mid-April. But of course, the current situation is very dynamic, very volatile. So it depends really also on how fast and effective governments are able to actually control and to actually get grips on the Corona outbreak.
So let's talk about the investment, because you said you're going to invest 30 billion. Are you worried about the financial well-being of BMW during this process? Are you concerned that we could see a shakeout in the auto industry as a whole because of the coronavirus?
Well, what I can talk about is, of course, our own group, the BMW Group, and we have a very solid financial situation. We have also a very solid cash position, which is important, of course, in these times. We are also taking measures really also to control cost. We already have programs in place which will be reinforced now. So we are confident that over the coming time period, and again, there will be a time after Corona as well, we will be able to sustain those significant investments that I talked about. So 30 billion, over 30 billion until 2025, and that is a significant number.
Do you think the auto industry will get the right kind of support from governments during this testing time?
Well, of course, governments around the world, also in Europe and in Germany, our home market, have said, of course, there will be significant capital injections in the markets, which, of course, we welcome. But also the BMW Group itself has a solid financial position. We've also shown in previous crises that actually we can come out stronger out of a crisis than actually we went into it.
So, Peter, last question to you. What kind of recovery do you see post-Corona? What do you think the shape of the auto industry will be like after that?
Well, let's first say a few words about China in this case, because we saw that by concerted action of the Chinese government, a very effective action, actually they seem to have gotten control back. And we see also after a dip in sales in the month of February in China, we see actually already recovery in the month March. And we expect actually that also to continue well into April and beyond. So it is possible actually to get to grips with this, shown by the China example. And of course, we prepare also certainly towards the second half of this year for the time after Corona.
BMW's Pieter Nota there talking to Al Jazeera's economics editor. Now, the pandemic is a big test for Latin America's ailing economies, already struggling on several fronts, including the devaluation of its currency, soaring inflation and huge unpayable debts. The impact could be devastating for Argentina. Al Jazeera's Teresa Burr reports from Buenos Aires.
Exports are crucial for Argentina's economy these days. The foreign currency generated by crops, beef and other products are what could help this country pay off foreign debt. But the COVID-19 is already having an impact here.
China is our main market, but it may start to recover. We are now seeing many of our European clients cancel the orders because nobody knows who will buy the beef. I know they're already freezing some of it. It's a huge problem for us because we depend on exports.
This plant sells mostly premium beef to China, Europe and the United States. And finding clients, it's not easy these days. As the COVID-19 spreads around the world, shows and public events are being suspended in Argentina in an attempt to contain the virus. Flights are also being cancelled in a country that is already struggling with capital controls, double-digit inflation, and is restructuring foreign debt.
The government has imposed mandatory isolations on people arriving from Europe, China, and even the United States. They're also considering fining those who do not respect the law and pose a threat to public health. But even though many believe that Argentina could succeed in containing the virus, the spread of the virus in this country, it is the economic situation that has many people worried here.
In the past years, most administrations have pinned down their hopes of economic recovery on Vaca Muerta, one of the largest shale oil and gas reserves in the world. But as the local economy deteriorates and worldwide markets stumble, investments are being rerouted outside the country.
We have a common characteristic, that is that Latin American countries, especially South American ones, we export commodities. Right? We export copper and minerals in Chile, Peru, then in Ecuador, Venezuela, Colombia, it's oil. In Brazil, Argentina, Uruguay, Paraguay, soybeans is other types of food. So I think we are going to feel the impact. We are feeling it right now with a decline in the price of commodities. So I believe this is a regional problem, but it's going to be more important in the countries who need foreign help, as for example the case of Argentina.
Help that could prevent a default like the one in 2001 that devastated this country's economy. People here are wary of the spread of the COVID-19 virus. But the faltering is what is worrying the government the most. Teresa Burr, Al Jazeera, Buenos Aires.
Well, most airlines could be bankrupt by the end of May. This is the warning from Australia's Centre for Aviation as governments impose travel bans due to the fast-spreading coronavirus. Many could be technically bankrupt already. Well, before the imposition of those travel bans, airlines were expected to lose $113 billion in revenue this year. And that's pushed many airlines to seek government support. In the United States, airlines have asked for a $50 billion bailout. But critics argue the airlines have mismanaged their finances, choosing to spend their cash on buying back shares to enrich shareholders. And by doing this, there's less stock in the market, thereby pushing up prices. According to Bloomberg, US airlines have used up about 96% of their cash on stock buybacks. Well, joining us now via Skype from Leicester in the UK is Updesh Kapoor. He's an aviation consultant. Updesh, so what do you make of all of this? I mean, do you think that some airlines could be bankrupt already or are well on their way to actually filing for bankruptcy?
Well, Darren, what's happening in the industry is so unprecedented in the last few weeks. This is the worst crisis since 2008, the financial crisis, and the SARS outbreak combined. Now, what's happening, and 9/11, of course. So if you combine all those three incidents, we are seeing the worst crisis in the aviation industry. And inevitably, we are going to see some heavy losses across the industry. We're also going to see airlines facing a lot of difficulties in terms of keeping their cash flows going. A lot of airlines do have cash reserves, but it's estimated that quite a few airlines only have like 2 months or 3 months max cash reserves left. So there is a real concern that we're going to see airlines folding. We've already seen one airline fold in the UK, Flybe, a few weeks ago, which was already chronic. It was facing difficulties. That's the first casualty. We are expected to see more casualties in the next month or two, definitely.
So, Updesh, what can governments do? I mean, there's talk of relaxing regulations on airlines so they won't lose those lucrative takeoff and landing slots. But I guess what airlines really want are financial bailouts, don't they?
Absolutely. I don't think the takeoff and landing slots issue is actually an issue right now. It's more to get money pumped into these airlines, because what's happening with the airlines is they are laying off staff. They're asking staff to take unpaid leave for several weeks over a period of several months. So what they're looking for is tax breaks. Tax breaks on fuel costs, which obviously are reduced now, but there are taxes there. We're also looking at pumping money into support salaries, which, as I say, people are being forced to be laid off, and also to keep the airlines running. Because don't forget, this is not just the airline industry. This is the entire travel and tourism industry. 35% of global trade relies on the aviation industry. And if there's a break in any shape or form in the aviation industry, it affects the supply chain across the board. Travel, tourism, hospitality, etc. So yes, the governments need to step in. I know it goes against investing, applying money into private enterprise. They have to do their own thing. They have to work everything out their own way. However, in the current situation, there is definitely a requirement for government aid. And we've also seen, in the States, there's the US carriers have been asking for financial assistance from White House. There's a $50 billion aid package that's being put into the economy. In the UK, we've seen £330 billion worth of money expected to be pumped into the economy. Some of that will obviously, go to key sectors like travel and tourism, of which aviation is a key component.
Updesh, so let's just throw this forward. I mean, when the dust has settled on all of this, do you think this will lead to a shakeout of the industry, fewer airlines, bigger code-sharing partnerships, for instance?
I think we will see certainly a shake-up. History has shown that when things like this happen, you are finding that airlines will shrink in size. Some airlines will disappear. In terms of shrinking in size, let me just explain what happens there. If you've got staff, 10,000, 12,000 staff, overstaffed, 25, 30% of those staff would probably disappear over the next few weeks or so. And it's going to be very, very difficult to claw back that 25% once the situation gets a lot better. So I think what we're going to see is in the industry, there's going to be a bit of camaraderie across the industry. I might be out of turn saying this, but I think the whole industry needs to work together, to go forward. And we're going to see more and more partnerships, because what's going to happen is airlines cannot fly every single route. They're going to rely on each other to support each other in partnerships to fly people from A to B.
And this issue of revenue, Updesh, is very important, because IATA believes that airlines could lose something like $113 billion this year, but that was before the travel ban. So what do you think now?
Well, I think that's a very conservative estimate. If you look over the years, over the last 10 years, revenues have actually increased up to about $860 billion last year. And the projected figures are $880 billion next year, this year, 2020. Now, with $113 billion wiped off, that's a huge chunk. And again, this is just conservative estimates. I don't think anybody realizes the severe impact of this. That 113 probably just is a figure that's been given based on what's been happening over the last few weeks. But the industry is going to go through more turmoil over the next few weeks and months. So I expect that 113 to be revised to $200 billion upwards.
Well, there's just a final question to you. India is looking to bail out its airlines, providing something like $1.6 billion. But the industry there has been in trouble for some time, hasn't it?
Absolutely. There's been overcapacity in India. We saw Jet Airways collapse last year. That disappeared. And that was one of the main, in fact, the main international carrier after Air India. Air India is a government-owned entity. That is facing financial difficulties. And I think the airline, the industry, the government will have to support in some shape or form the private carriers. I just wanted to add something here, Darren. Across the world, what we're seeing is we've got the private airlines and the government state-owned airlines. I think the government state-owned airlines, a lot of them are doing pretty badly, aside from the coronavirus crisis. And I think the governments will prop up those airlines because they belong to the governments. Those are the ones which actually will survive, even though they've got heavy cost base. But I think the government in India will have to do something seriously to step up measures to protect those airlines, domestic airlines. And the biggest issue in India is the taxes. There are so many taxes across the aviation industry. And I think that's when the government can step in to reduce or eliminate those taxes.
Updesh Kapoor, great talking to you. Thanks for talking to Counting the Cost.
Thanks, Darren.
Now, in Ghana, illegal gold mining is threatening farmlands, destroying the landscape and poisoning water supplies, leaving some communities struggling to find drinking water. It's reached such proportions that treatment plants are being shut down, and there's warnings the country might be forced to import water. Rahila Mohammed reports.
The River Pra in southern Ghana is contaminated with mercury and cyanide. And vegetation is drying up in Ghana's heartland of cocoa, the main ingredient of chocolate. The river is also vital for fishing, farming and water. The pollution is blamed on thousands of small-scale gold mines. Working round the clock at this one, boys as young as 15 and dozens of men. What they're doing is illegal. Many mines have been here for years despite a government crackdown to close them. They operate deep in the forest, hidden from the police and a military task force. Attracted by the precious metal, miners come from different parts of Ghana and neighboring countries as well as China. They say it's their only source of income, regardless of the risks and injuries.
I was able to provide money and help my family in the Volta region until the government decided to ban small-scale and illegal mining. Now police harass us all the time. Some of us try to run away and others fall into the muddy pits. Those who can't swim get injured or die.
Joe had his hand cut off 2 years ago while mining. He received no compensation.
There are no decent jobs for the uneducated and poor young people. If we had training opportunities provided by the government, it would be better.
Makeshift pumping stations are used to divert rivers.
So this is the goat. So when they go and burn it, when they burn it, then to become yellow, it will become yellowish, the gold color.
On this day, these 5 miners found just a few grams and sold it for $120 shared between them. Ghana is one of Africa's leading gold exporters. President Nana Akufo-Addo has pledged to continue his fight against illegal mining. His government regulates the industry.
The community mining scheme, that is meant to cover a lot more people in a community sense, to get people in a community who want to get involved in mining to be able to do so, but do so properly. The same law applies, the small-scale mining law.
But critics and environmental activists blame the lack of political will and corruption for government promises falling short.
So most of these funding sources have been from foreigners and then have been from the top political elites in the society. That is the reason why battling illegal mining has also been difficult.
While environmental groups call for tighter regulations, miners say they have no choice but to continue digging for their survival. Rahila Mohammed, Al Jazeera.
Well, that's our show for this week. But remember, you can get in touch with us via Twitter. Use the hashtag AJCTC when you do. Or drop us an email. countingthecost@aljazeera.net is our address. And there's more for you online at aljazeera.com/CTC. That'll take you straight to our page, which has individual reports, links, and entire episodes for you to catch up on. Well, that's it for this edition of Counting the Cost. I'm Darren Jordan from the whole team here. Thanks for joining us. The news on Al Jazeera is next.
Aviation.